We are here talking about monitoring learner progress in the classroom. As you can see in this picture, there are 3 P's of assessment: progress, process, and product. First of all, let's see why we need to do formative assessment. Formative assessment assists and supports learning and helps us to adjust teaching and learning so that we can help learners to reach the desired goal. It also tells us what learners can do and cannot do and can do with some support. And the 2 terms that are used for this is AFL, which is assessment for learning because it assists us with learning, and the other one, which is summative assessment, is assessment of learning. Who is involved in AFL? Let's see. I would strongly emphasize that it is both the teacher and the students. Usually the teacher does assessment and learners are just receivers of that assessment. But I would like to emphasize here that both students and teacher are to be involved if we want the students to be aware learners and to take charge of their own learning. So when you do assessment for learning, you are also helping the learners to learn and be able to become autonomous and take charge of their learning, which is a very important goal in the teaching learning process. For a moment, let's try and understand what learning itself means. Look at this slide. Learning occurs when students are thinking, problem solving, constructing, transforming, investigating, creating, analyzing, making choices, organizing, deciding, explaining, talking and communicating, sharing, representing, predicting, interpreting, assessing, reflecting, taking responsibility, exploring, asking, answering, recording, gaining new knowledge and applying that new knowledge to new situations. As you can see, it's a very complex process, and formative assessment or AFL helps us to monitor that learning. It's very important to make assessment a very pleasant experience to our students and ensure that it brings out the best in them and not be a stressful experience. There are 5 key strategies that we could consider while doing this monitoring. First is sharing learning expectations. What does it mean? That is, learners and the teacher know what the task is about and where they have to get at. So it is being very clear about the goal. However small the task is, they must know what they have to do. The second thing is you're trying to find out through questions, observation, how they're going to go about this task in order to get to the goal. So it is a kind of engineering effective classroom discussion, questions that can elicit evidence of learning and making inferences from that evidence. If a student is quiet, what does that mean? What is the inference you're going to draw? If the student is continuously talking, does that mean the student is learning? So all these are inferences that a teacher has to make. And based on that, in the third step, you give feedback. And that feedback supports the student's learning. And in this whole process, both self-assessment and peer assessment are involved. Because the goals are clear, you yourself judge whether you are on the path to the goal or how far behind you are, and being able to reset that goal and reach it. I would like to illustrate these 5 key strategies with an example. I did a small experiment in class 8 where I took this picture task that you can see and asked them to arrange it in a sequential order first. That was the first subtask, and then to give captions for each of the pictures to make a story. The correct order is F, C, E, A, D, B. Of course, some students might make a mistake or give a correct order and yet substantiate it or argue that it's correct. Of course, you will need to judge it according to whether their logic is correct. So depending on the level, depending on what students are trying to do there, you will have to allow that. In this experiment, what happened was, although they ordered it correctly, most of them could not write any caption. Then I went to them individually, tried to understand why they couldn't do that. Many of them could tell me the story in Hindi very fluently. Mind you, they were class 8 students. They did it very well. And then they asked me if they could write it in Hindi. I said, go ahead. Although, don't forget, the goal for my task was to get them to write it in English. So here, on the basis of my observation, I had changed the goal for those who couldn't do it. And yet, some of them wanted to write in English, in broken English, but they didn't know many words. They showed me the picture and they'd say, what is this? They meant rope. So they got the word rope. Rope usne pull kiya. So let's see what I was trying to do when I actually did this task. Look at this slide here. First of all, I gave them the task and then I tried to find out their present level of ability. This I did by observing, by going to them and talking to them, and when I heard them talk to each other, that is when they were doing the task or were not able to do the task or were able to do it with some support, I was getting an idea of what level they are at. So that was the first stage, first 2 stages as you can see in this picture. And then I took action. That is, I told them, okay, you can give it to me in Hindi. You can tell me orally what the story is about. Some of them tried writing, I went and helped them. So in that sense, I was redefining or modifying their goals. What I'm trying to demonstrate is there are many different levels in the same task, and if you observe carefully, you will be able to see those levels, and you will need to allow that. And that's how you monitor their learning closely.
Do you mean to say that in formative assessment, the teacher needs to set different goals and assessment criteria for different set of students?
Exactly. You need to do that. In fact, the teacher is doing it, only not consciously. So you are all the time paying attention to which learner can do how well, but you are not acknowledging it nor providing adequate support for that. So by negotiating through dialogue and observation, you are trying to find out where they are and what else they need to do. Don't forget that there is a kind of a path of development each one has to go through. I would like to end by pointing out what AFL is not. Very often it's misunderstood. To give you this example of CBSE's new innovation, which is CCE, Continuous Comprehensive Evaluation. Teachers do a lot of work by way of assessment, but I think a lot of it happens to be mini summative assessments. So that's what we have to guard against. Just look at the slide. More frequent summative assessments is not AFL. All testing that a teacher does in the classroom is not AFL. And filling up lots and lots of pro formas and forms that very often teachers are required to do is not formative assessment. And when you do this kind of assessment, you also label students as poor, slow learner, first generation learner, which is not a part of AFL. AFL is not a test but a process. It produces not a score but a description of what one can do. There is a lot of work that the teacher has to do. Most importantly, it's not something that interferes with students' learning, because as we saw, learning is a very complex process and involves a whole lot of cognitive, affective and psychomotor abilities. So we'll need to facilitate the learning of those abilities and not interfere with that.